What happens when a small fiberglass boat, barely 35 feet long, suddenly becomes the center of an international storm? On September 15, 2025, a flash lit up the Caribbean sky. In seconds, a suspected cartel vessel was reduced to burning wreckage, and 3 men would never make it home. But the explosion at sea wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a dangerous new precedent, one that blurs the line between crime and war and raises a question that Washington doesn't want to answer. Are drug runners now being treated as terrorists? At 1900 hours on September 15th, the U.S. military had already been watching its mark for nearly 2 hours. On radar, it was nothing more than a streak slicing across the water, too fast for a freighter, too steady for a fishing boat. 45 knots, no transponder, no radio calls. To trained eyes, there was only one possibility: a cartel go fast. High overhead, a surveillance pod zoomed in. 4 outboards hammered at full throttle, tarps stretched tight over the deck, silhouettes pacing nervously. The crew believed they were invisible, running the same route they'd taken before, convinced protection money had cleared the way. Each man knew what was at stake: millions in cargo, millions more in payouts. Enough to buy a new life if they reached the U.S. coastline. The helmsman kept checking the GPS, nodding as the numbers lined up exactly as promised. What he didn't know was that his boat had been locked in a crosshair since 1700 hours. Every move, every turn, tracked in silence. And the operators were only waiting for one signal to end it all. At 1906 hours, the waiting ended. On the infrared screen, a single white-hot flare bloomed into fire. In seconds, the vessel was gone. No chase, no warning, no chance to surrender. 3 men vanished into the sea that night. Hours later, the White House confirmed what had happened. Officials called it a kinetic strike on a suspected narco vessel. Careful to note the location: 200 miles off Venezuela, well outside sovereign waters. That detail mattered. It allowed Washington to frame the action not as aggression, but as defense in the global commons. To the public, the only evidence was a 22-second clip posted online. A flash on the horizon, fire dancing on black water, no images of the crew, no cargo recovered. Just a blast in the night sky. Officials claimed the target was packed with narcotics headed for American streets, but offered nothing to prove it. Still, one fact was undeniable. This wasn't interdiction, it was elimination. And in that instant, the rules at sea had shifted. The September 15th strike wasn't a one-off. Just 13 days earlier, another explosion had ripped across the Caribbean night. On September 2nd, U.S. officials admitted they had carried out their first-ever kinetic action against what they described as a narco vessel moving north. That blast killed 11 people instantly. The Pentagon pushed out the same kind of video clip: a grainy horizon, a sudden flash, a wall of fire. No close-ups, no survivors, no recovered cargo. And just like September 15th, there was no independent way to prove who the men on board really were. Washington insisted they were cartel smugglers. Caracas swore they were innocent fishermen. With the wreckage sunk and no investigators allowed near the site, the truth drowned with the crew. What couldn't be denied was the pattern. First strike, 11 dead. Second strike, 3 more. And within hours of that second blast, U.S. officials claimed they were already tracking a third vessel. This didn't look like isolated incidents. It looked like the start of a campaign. In Washington, the language changed almost overnight. The men on those boats were no longer smugglers. They were called narco-terrorists. That one phrase did more than describe. It redefined the battlefield. By attaching drug runners to the same category as terrorists, U.S. officials tied the fight against cartels to the same framework built after 9/11. Homeland defense, not law enforcement. National security, not criminal interdiction. And once that word, terrorist, enters the conversation, the rules shift dramatically. The president himself framed the September 15th strike as an act of protection. He claimed the vessels were carrying lethal amounts of narcotics destined for U.S. streets, and that neutralizing them at sea was necessary to defend American lives. Pentagon briefers echoed the line: no arrests, no prosecutions. These were hostile threats in international waters. Inside the Beltway, hawks applauded the move. They argued it was long overdue, proof that Washington was finally treating cartels like the military organizations they've become. But critics fired back just as hard. If drug smugglers can be branded as terrorists, where does the definition stop? And what kind of war was America sliding into, one strike at a time? The September strikes didn't just destroy boats, they detonated legal and political debates that spread far beyond the Caribbean. Under the U.S. Constitution, only Congress has the power to authorize military action. Yet no new mandate had been passed, no resolution approved. When pressed, Pentagon lawyers pointed to Article 2 of the Constitution, the president's duty to defend the homeland. To critics, that was a stretch, a legal loophole big enough to sail a fleet through. Members of both parties in Congress demanded answers. Was the executive branch quietly rewriting the rules of war? If suspected smugglers in international waters could be targeted without oversight, what stopped the same logic from being applied elsewhere? Today it's drug boats. Tomorrow, something far bigger. Human rights groups raised another alarm. With no cargo recovered, no BO's identified, no independent proof of what was destroyed, the strikes edged dangerously close to what they called extrajudicial killings. Without evidence, the world was asked to take Washington's word at face value. The regional reaction was just as sharp. Cuba accused the U.S. of militarizing the Caribbean. Venezuela denounced the attacks as assaults on its citizens, claiming innocent fishermen had been killed. State TV in Caracas broadcast grieving families accusing Washington of fabricating the narco-terrorist story to justify aggression. Even within the Pentagon, not everyone was celebrating. Quiet voices worried that destroying suspected vessels meant destroying intelligence with them. Boarding missions, while risky, had uncovered encrypted radios, sat phones, maps, and cartel ledgers in the past. A missile strike left nothing but wreckage and questions. The fallout was clear. Tactically effective, maybe. Strategically, far more dangerous. On paper, the strikes made sense. Cartel go-fast boats are some of the hardest vessels in the world to intercept. Built low to the water, often from fiberglass that barely registers on radar, and powered by 4 or more high-performance outboards, they can outrun most Coast Guard cutters. Boarding them means closing to within rifle range of crews who may be armed and desperate. Every chase risks turning into a firefight. A precision strike avoids all of that. No chase, no close-quarters standoff, no danger to American crews. From a distance, one missile can erase the threat in seconds. Clean, simple, and final. But that very simplicity is also its greatest flaw. Nothing survives. No suspects to interrogate, no cargo to test, no sat phones or ledgers that could reveal networks, routes, or leadership ties. Each strike might solve a tactical problem, but it also vaporizes opportunities that intelligence teams depend on. Some in the Pentagon quietly admitted, by blowing up boats, Washington may be blinding itself. A short-term show of force could mean long-term loss of visibility into cartel operations. And without that visibility, the next move becomes guesswork. In the quest to eliminate threats at sea, America might be sacrificing the very intelligence it needs to win the larger fight. Step back, and the pattern looks less like isolated strikes and more like the opening moves of a campaign. In the weeks around September, aviation spotters tracked U.S. F-35s shifting into Puerto Rico, surveillance planes orbiting the southern Caribbean, and drones fanning out across open waters. Layer by layer, the region was turning into a battle space. Supporters of the new posture argued it was the only way forward. Cartels had evolved, fielding vessels faster and better equipped than many navies. If America didn't escalate, the traffickers would keep outrunning interdiction and flooding U.S. cities with narcotics worth billions. To hawks in Washington, a missile was cheaper and clearer than a Coast Guard chase that might end in failure. But critics saw something far more troubling. Allies whispered that the U.S. was normalizing the use of military force in what had always been law enforcement territory. Human rights groups warned of blurred legal lines and a dangerous precedent, criminals treated as enemy combatants. And in Latin America, governments accused Washington of militarizing the Caribbean to tighten control over a fragile region. 2 strikes in less than 2 weeks, 14 dead. No verifiable evidence shown. Tactical victories maybe, but strategic consequences that could ripple for years. What began as chasing drug boats now looks like the foundation of a new maritime doctrine, one that could reshape international law, strain alliances, and drag the Caribbean into an undeclared war. 2 strikes in 13 days, 14 men killed, no cargo displayed, no survivors to testify, no independent proof of what was really on board. Washington calls it protection, Caracas calls it aggression. And somewhere between the silence of the wreckage and the flash of those explosions, the truth remains hidden. What's undeniable is this: the United States has shifted from chasing smugglers to destroying them outright. Supporters see strength, a bold line in the water that cartels will think twice before crossing. Critics see a dangerous precedent, one that erases the boundary between criminals and combatants, between law enforcement and war. So here's the question that lingers long after the fire on the horizon fades. Was this smart interdiction or the opening chapter of a new kind of conflict at sea?